I started the Real Mental podcast because it bugs me when film and TV miss the mark about how mental health gets portrayed. Real Mental is a podcast where a film-loving psychiatrist, that's me, talks to a film critic to help people figure out their lives by getting to the truth about mental health in the movies. Welcome, John Wenzel, to the Real Mental podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Marcia.
It's great to have you because, first of all, I'm very interested in your expertise. And second of all, I love this movie that we're going to talk about, Past Lives. So before we get started, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do?
So I am an arts and entertainment reporter at the Denver Post in Denver, Colorado. And I started out and still do to some extent, cover all kinds of stuff: film, books, music, comedy, theater, stuff like that. But in recent years, I've come to review a lot more film, TV, and theater. And I also freelance on those subjects for national publications here in the US. So yeah, that's kind of my background. I come to it as a fan, somewhat as a booster of the film world, as a lifelong movie buff. But yeah, I'm sort of a half reporter, half critic.
Well, that sounds like a fun job for sure. Well, let's jump into this movie, Past Lives, because I think it was one of the best films I've seen in the last while. And I just wanted to get your impression of it.
I thought it was brilliant. I gave it 4 stars. I've only given 3 movies 4 stars in the whole time I've been reviewing films on and off for 25 years. So first of all, it's about kids a woman and a man who meet as kids in Korea, South Korea, and the woman ends up immigrating to the US with her family, and the boy stays in Korea. However, she's able to find him, and they sort of rekindle this connection they had before, and it's sort of an on-off survey of their past lives, to hit the nail on the head. So one thing I loved about it, and I said this in the review, is that it trusts the audience to sort of get it in so many words. It doesn't overly coddle them, it doesn't hold their hands, but it definitely gives them more than enough to read the situations. And I think that kind of nuance is what's missing in so many, psychological, mental health, addiction portrayals in film, is that feeling and not having to use dialogue constantly to sort of situate where it's going. So that was one of the big pluses for me.
Yeah, I agree with you. They didn't pander. So why don't you go through a little bit of the story and how you found it as a fan and as a critic?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because it opens up with 3 people sitting at a bar, and these people off screen talking about them. A woman and 2 men on either side of her. One is an Asian guy and another is a white guy, and the woman in the middle appears to be Asian or Asian American. And so then you're sort of got this mystery. How did this get to this point? Who are these people? And it goes back to South Korea when they're kids, and it doesn't stop jumping around a little bit. It's not all like a figure 8 of a pretzel type movie, but it does kind of go between memories and time periods. And it sets that tone really early on with just the freeness and the organic feeling of the kids, being together, spending time together. And there's this sort of, wistfulness and aching feeling of childhood. It's, wanderlust, but also innocence. And again, it just carries through the movie. The female character grows up. She becomes a playwright. She moves to New York City, which feels somewhat autobiographical for the director, who was a playwright. This is her directorial debut. And, she's online one day, and as so many of us have done on whatever app or platform, we look up people we used to know. We see how they're doing. We put their names in, and with a little bit of sleuthing, she finds her old friend. And you have to forgive me, the names of the characters are not right off the top of my head at the moment, but they create a very meaningful long distance video chat relationship, which is, I think, kind of rare unless that's all you have, but it sort of speaks to the early days of Zoom and video chatting, and when people were just sort of using it, and certainly the pandemic, the last few years of physical disconnection. So, more time passes, and then he wants to come to New York from South Korea to visit her, where he's, sort of fitting into the traditional social models and professional models there, sort of head down, working very hard at this high level engineering job, but not having much of a rich, inner emotional or personal life, seemingly. So yeah, he ends up in New York, and they stroll around together, and they have these situations that parallel and expand upon and flip the dynamics of some of these experiences they had as kids. And the callbacks and just the direction and everything is just wonderful. It's just so wonderful. And it's so different, even than other Oscar bait and other, dramas and films out there. Like I said, it really trusts the audience. And you don't see that a lot in films that are trying to portray something so intense. They often feel the need to, just club you over the head until they believe that you've absorbed that message.
Yeah. Well, there's one thing that I wanted to interject, which is that when they're having their video calls, she actually wants to meet first.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
There's your doggy.
Yeah, sorry about that.
It's okay. He gets cold feet and she gets hurt. I think she feels rejected, and then they stop communicating.
Right, and then she kind of breaks it off.
Right. And then she meets her husband at an art retreat, and she jumps into her life in America, and she gets married, and they're together, and the husband is also in the art, and so they're well suited for each other, and they have a life, and it shows that they have a life.
Yeah, it's interesting because that's another organic portrayal of a situation, in which people make lifelong bonds. I think it's like a writing fellowship or something. And I was actually on a Critics Institute fellowship last summer, and I made some really intense connections with other critics, and it was really great. So to see that and to see her kind of go in that path with someone who's very different from her. He's, ostensibly a white guy. He's, culturally Jewish. They make some jokes about that in the film. There's some references too. But you can see why they have a genuine connection too. And it's a nice flag to plant for not having binary portrayals of love. I love this person, I can't get over them, my life is ruined, or I'm just going to try to forget about them with someone else. It's like you can hold multiple simultaneous, relatively equal intense feelings about people and things all the time. And that was one thing, I'm glad you brought that up about the Zoom, because there's so much uncertainty. It's not a straight line for sure, but those sort of complicated feelings she has for the two most important, men in her life, the two most important romantic relationships, is more true to life for me than most dramas.
Yeah, and the man in South Korea is a very interesting character, because on the one hand, he sees himself as pining for her and wanting her, but when she gives him an opportunity to come and visit, he freezes and he doesn't, and he kind of blows it. And then she gets married, and then he shows up kind of without even telling her. He just kind of drops on her doorstep, literally. And it's, his choices are really interesting because psychologically it shows a lot of ambivalence, right? He tells himself that he's in love with her, but his behavior kind of belies that.
Mm-hmm. And that, to some extent, I would say is a real convention, a real formulaic element of romantic comedies and romantic dramas, the mismatch, the turn of fortune, the third act surprise, that sort of, I'm ready for you. And as soon as the person's ready, the other person's not, or vice versa. But that happens in real life too. And I thought that was handled with care. And, you can tell me what you think about this, but one of the powerful attributes of that movie is that when I think about it, I don't think about long stretches of dialogue or pronouncements. I think about looks, long held, barely edited scenes of these two incredible actors who are just being with each other in the moment. I don't know if you picked that up or if that's part of what stuck with you, but, thinking about them by the carousel in New York, thinking about them standing, on a Brooklyn street waiting for a cab to pick up the guy. Hey, I think it is. And it's just sort of lost the thread there a little bit. But.
I totally agree with you. It's like there was a lot of emotion that was held in their gaze. They would look at each other and there was a lot of feeling. And even in the scene in the bar where the three of them are, the husband, the look on his face, he didn't say anything. He was just sitting there, and occasionally he'd look over at the two of them and they would be speaking in Korean, and then he'd look back at his drink, and then he'd look over at them and he'd look back at his drink. And you could see the exquisite discomfort that he was feeling. You could see all the feelings roiling just beneath the surface. And, he's her husband. He knows she loves him. He knows they're happy. And yet there's this guy who shows up, this handsome guy, masculine guy, from her culture, who knew her as a child. And there he is sitting on the other side of her. And he just doesn't know what to do with himself. He wants to jump out of his skin. He doesn't know if he wants to punch the guy or, throw him out or leave himself. Like, you could just see that all those feelings, and everyone in the audience can relate to him. Everybody in the audience can relate to him and knows exactly what he's feeling. And he says not a word. So I think the setups that they created in the movie to make it crystal clear what the people were feeling, that was very artistic.
Yeah, absolutely. They communicated that very strongly and still didn't dispatch with all the nuance. I think one feature of that, and again, you may or may not know this, some of your listeners may or may not know this about Past Lives, which is undoubtedly going to get a lot of awards this season. I think TIFF is going on right now, and Oscar season is coming up early next year, and there's no way it's not. It's just that good. But one of the things the director did is prevent the actors from certain interactions for the sake of the film. So there's a scene where Nora, the woman, and Hai embrace for the first time as adults, see each other again. The director prevented them from hugging the entire time on the set until that moment. And there's a little featurette about it on YouTube you can find, but it's so smart and, kind of a method acting, whatever type way. But it really works in this case too. Like, it's just really functional. And same with the husband, you feel a little bit, or I did anyway, sort of aligned against him early on. I'm like, no, her true love is, her childhood love. Not thinking about the fact that these people are highly symbolic. One represents her American life, her westernized life. The other represents her traditional, Southeast Asian life, or South Korean life. So the director prevented the husband and the childhood friend from meeting until they meet for the first time on camera. Like, that's like the first live take.
Oh, wow.
He comes through the door of their apartment and shakes his hand, and they're just they rehearsed, they knew their lines and stuff, but they'd never met. Incredible results from that. I'm not sure everyone would be able to get those, but I think that has something to do too with, like you said, just the unmistakable messages that are being sent.
Yeah, that's a very interesting technique. The other thing I was thinking of in terms of the psychology of this film is how when these characters are talking about, their relationship, Hae-sung and Nora, and, he's saying, I felt something. And she said, yes, but, you're the guy who stayed in Korea. That's who you are. And I'm the woman who left Korea, and that's who I am. I was thinking about how in the movie toward the end, Nora's character says to Hae-sun, I'm the woman who left and you're the guy who stayed in Korea. Right. And that's all she said. But those words really clarified who the characters were. And it even explained, I think, why Hae-sun didn't come to America the first time she offered, right? Like he's really stuck in his Korean life and his Korean way, his Korean job. He belongs there. And I think she belongs in America. And I think it was a very big thing for him to go. And I think he had to work his way up to it. But by the time he got to the point where he could go, it was obviously too late for them to have a relationship. And even if he had gone that first time, he wouldn't have been happy in the United States and she wouldn't have gone back to Korea. So really, they were not meant for each other. So it was just as well, it feels like, that he couldn't do it. So he like, it's like he freed her. He freed her to make the right choice, to marry an American, to live her American life. And then when he came, there was no chance of her trying to figure out how they were going to be together because she was already living her American life with her American partner. Does that make sense to you?
It does. And I've thought about, that dynamic when I rewatch it, which I'm excited to do. I've still only seen it once at this point. And how, good films make their endings feel both inevitable and surprising. And I really didn't know how that movie was going to end, and I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it. But in hindsight, it does feel somewhat inevitable because, as you said, she defines her identity as someone who left where she's from. And she defines his identity as someone who stayed where he's from, for all the good and bad things those imply. In this case, maybe not such a good thing. It prevented them from really getting together. But that feeling of predestination doesn't hang over the film too strongly. But in hindsight, it does feel like their identities are sort of, it gives credence to that notion that identity is fixed, or that so many things are set from early childhood, which, I'm no psychologist or psychiatrist.
Yeah.
I don't know how true that is, but it's like no matter how much she changes over her life, she is that person. She's that person with wanderlust and ambition for recognition and maybe a little bit more of an ego than him.
Yeah, she's definitely very driven. New York feels like the right place for her. She seems like the kind of person who should live in New York City.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? She's that ambitious, driven, hardworking, passionate, artistic type who just, you look at her and you go, of course, New York, right?
Yeah.
And she could have been born there. She belongs so well there. Whereas Hae-sun really belongs in Korea. Like when you see him in his scenes at home with his friends, he looks totally at home there. And when he's in America, he always looks a little bit uncomfortable. He's always stiff and awkward, and it's not just because he's with Nora, he's just stiff and awkward in that world. It's not his world. So, the movie really shows you with just body language and simple things how, he has his world, he has her world. And, it's very hard to bridge that divide. Whereas even though Arthur is Jewish, he's American, he's not culturally from her world, he's, he was born in a different place, they're a much better fit as a couple. And their relationship seems very easy, right? It seems very that's the word I keep getting, easy. It's like an easy going kind of comfortable. It's not that it's without passion, but they're not rubbing up against each other with friction. It's not like a adversarial, contentious kind of relationship where they're always sort of sniping at each other. They're happy together, it looks like. And now let's pause for a quick word about my other podcast. I'm Dr. Marcia Sirota. We all need to be inspired and uplifted these days. We need a good laugh and we need to be moved. In the Ruthless Compassion podcast, I speak with a wonderfully diverse group of people. They've overcome daunting obstacles and they're making unique, exciting contributions to our communities and to our world. The Ruthless Compassion podcast is at 145 episodes and counting. Why not have a listen to it today?
Yeah, it's not a comedy, so it's not based on that sort of screwball repartee or, opposites attract kind of thing. But yeah, I know I've said this a lot, but the nuance and the nonverbal aspects of it, I think, are largely what makes it so good. I mean, Nora does prod him a bit, and she's a little more, seems like, mischievous and willing to, go to some places he doesn't seem ready to go. But yeah, it's like they're at home in these environments, and yet, as you said, there's that one scene where Hai is with his friends, or they show him at the same kind of, bar with his friends a couple times through the passage of time. And he seems comfortable, and so does Nora, but a little forlorn too. Not all the way there, not totally present. They're still, their heart's still a little bit with the other. And so, there's just this great overarching romance to it. And a lot of romantic movies, despite the genre title, don't have that. They don't have that feeling of, not fatalism so much or destiny, but just grand emotions. You can say that, you can write it in the script all you want, but if the actors can't portray that and the director can't elicit that, then it's just not there on screen.
No, you're absolutely right. And it's very clear that Nora loves Hae-sun and Hae-sun loves Nora, and Nora loves Arthur and Arthur loves Nora. And I think that Arthur in the bar scene, he knows that they love each other. He knows, he can feel it, which is why he's so exquisitely uncomfortable. What he doesn't know is what they're going to do with those feelings, right? And I think that's what's so beautiful about it. That's what creates this tension, right? We know that they love each other. The husband knows that they love each other. What we don't know is what they do with those feelings. And I like it because it defies the typical romantic comedy or romantic drama. There's not a big major, exposition or, it's just, it does what it does, right? And it makes sense. The ending makes sense. It's not a disappointment like I get so many times when I watch romantic comedies. This would never happen in real life. This movie feels like completely plausible, in real life, although so much more heightened because it's film.
Yeah.
But it feels totally, totally authentic and what real people would do. And, in that last scene when they're together waiting for a taxi, and just the way they are is so exquisite. It's so poignant and so, again, authentic. I was very moved.
Yeah.
And I wasn't moved in a way like I wanted a different ending or I wanted something else. I just felt my feelings, and it was lovely to just have a movie where you can just feel all those feelings and be okay with the way the film is evolving.
Yeah. And just, it allows you to sit with, as they say, with what you're feeling and sort of actually process it a little. And the movie gives you permission and elbow room to do that. Like I said, not just because it's not holding your hand and talking down to you, but because there is some ambiguity. And, indie dramas by and large are better at this than commercial films, big Hollywood studio films. But, it's not a moral judgment at the end. And this is what I like about films. My favorite films that, deal with addiction or mental illness or whatever, there's not a moral judgment. There's not a comeuppance. There's not, here's what you get. Here's your consolation prize. It's just, this is how things work out sometimes. Like you said, I didn't know what kind of ending I wanted until I saw it. And I think it's the right ending for the movie. There could have been a million other ones, but it just felt right intuitively.
I agree. I also appreciate the fact that they're portraying love on screen, and they're not portraying it in this typical way with, grand gestures and, romantic flourishes. The love that is felt between the two main characters is much more internal and much more reticent. Most of it is not expressed directly. And
Yeah.
I love that restraint. And I love the fact that this movie gives you an idea of how you can love another person and they can love you, but it doesn't necessarily lead to a specific endpoint, right? It doesn't go in a particular direction. And so many of, as you say, the major Hollywood studios, the love story always has to end with happily ever after, even if it's completely and utterly implausible, even if there's a last second, like you said, third act surprise, a last second twist, which makes no sense psychologically. Like, this is the kind of romantic movie where it makes sense and doesn't follow a formula for how love is supposed to go on screen. And I really appreciated that. And I felt like for people who have ever loved, it's a refreshing change because we can all identify with that. I'm sure many, many people have had their own love stories go a similar way at some point or another in their life, right? When you love someone, they love you, but it doesn't work out in the way that, the cinema portrays.
Yeah. Yeah. And, another refreshing thing was that it didn't force physical depictions. It would have been justified and, in this director's hands, I'm sure not unwelcome to see on screen, but there was no making out, there's no intercourse, there's no consummation, so to speak, because it's not necessary. And it's not even part of the story. It doesn't make sense in this story anyway, given the dynamics of it. But, I think that can be limiting. In a lot of movies, they want to show the passion, and that's a way of illustrating the passion of a love affair or obsession or, whatever that whole spectrum from 0 to 100. And it just wasn't necessary in this. And that, I think that both opens it up to maybe a broader audience in various ways. And also just doesn't limit it thematically either. It's not, torrid or tawdry or any of these cliches that people write in film synopses. It's something else.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. And, she doesn't have to cheat on her husband. She can love this guy, and it doesn't mean that she doesn't love her husband. And it doesn't mean, anything in particular about their relationship. She can have love in her heart for her friend, and it can be like a big love even, and it can be okay. And I think when she says to her husband, I'm just going to walk him to the taxi, and he gives her a look and they give each other a look, you can see on Arthur, the husband's face, that he's okay, that he understands and he's okay, that, he's good with the situation. And so it shows that you can love another person and it doesn't mean that it has to lead to something, and again, yeah, we don't have to have the major sex scene in a movie to demonstrate passion. I think a lot of filmmakers throw it in because they think that's how they're going to sell tickets. They're going to have everybody get naked and that's what is going to get the eyeballs on the screen. But I actually think that making a good film is what's going to get the eyeballs on the screen.
Yeah.
And this film certainly showed that. It, defied so many of the conventions of a romantic movie and was so much better for it. So I think it's a wonderful opportunity for other filmmakers to see what's possible in making art and showing that kind of restraint and demonstrating strong emotions with minimal dialogue and without the requisite sex scenes. So I appreciated that. I also appreciated that psychologically, so much of the time our feelings are not expressed in actions, right? We have these powerful emotions. Oh my gosh, we have these powerful emotions, and it's all internal or in a look, like when your dog was barking earlier and you were rolling your eyes, I could see that you were physically uncomfortable, but there were no words, right? You didn't say anything. You were just like, I could see, oh my gosh, his dog is barking and he feels really bad about it. So, right, that's being human, right? We have these strong emotions and we have them inside ourselves. And then, we will give a look, we'll exchange a glance. The other person will or won't understand. And that's life. And I love that part of the movie, that so many of these strong emotions were not acted out, right? They were very human in that way. We have these feelings, we have these experiences. We don't necessarily say or do anything. We're just having them, and the other person might know it. And in this case, I think the other people did understand each other, what they were going through. But
Yeah,
I thought that it was beautiful.
Achieving that is so hard, and as I'm sure you know, so much harder than it looks. To make it seem that natural when film is, a completely deliberate artificial medium. And what's interesting to me is how natural the director makes it seem when it's so much harder than it looks to make it seem casual, because there's a lot of talk of efficiency and economy in filmmaking. And there has to be, certainly from a resource and budgetary standpoint, or else these things don't get made. But what I felt with this movie was so much prep work, which is what makes a good play too. And the director's a playwright. So much went into conceiving it and, all the usual pre-production, but also just exploring how this was going to feel, what it was going to look like, in ways I feel like a lot of films get sort of short shrift in that. So there's a wonderful economy to it that allows, maybe ironically, that allows the rest of it to spread out and have time to luxuriate a little bit in moments and feeling, and you're not rushing to the next scene to fit all the action in or fit all the beats and plot points. It's got so much going for it from the very beginning that it's like, okay, now we can move on to the higher level stuff. It's a mature movie, but not in either the like On Golden Pond or NC-17 sense. It's mature in the like sort of intellectual sense almost.
Yeah, artistically. I was wondering what you thought of the fact that Sun's character only speaks Korean, and Nora speaks both English and Korean, and then she speaks English to her husband, Arthur. What do you think about the choice that, Sun doesn't speak English, and so all of their interactions are in Korean? Did you get a sense of what that was all about?
Yeah, I mean, I think on its face, it shows she's the bridge. One half the bridge comes from Korea and the other half extends to and connects to America. So she has culturally assimilated, and, she wrestles a little bit with how much of her past does she want to feel in touch with? And does she ever want to go back to, the suburbs of Seoul, places like that? In another sense, it really was a choice, because I have a friend who's Korean American, his mom's from South Korea, and a lot of Korean people speak great English. A lot of people around the world speak great English when United States citizens only speak English. So they easily could have shown Hai speaking English, and that would have been completely plausible, because it's standard for a lot of people to have multiple languages. But the fact that they made that decision. And, who knows if Arthur speaks a different language. At the end, he maybe tries to pick up a few Korean words to show his commitment to, adapting for Nora and wanting to be with her. But it's like, he's there ready for her if she wants him. And I'm not sure you can say that about Hai Sung. And so I think that choice to communicate in different languages is another kind of symbolic reinforcement of the contrast between the two men and how they represent different, parts of Nora's mind.
You're right. You reminded me that Arthur did learn some Korean, and he was, doing pretty well for, an American. But I also thought that what it did was it really reinforced that sense of place. Like, Hae-sun speaks Korean. he's Korean. He belongs in Korea. Nora still speaks her native tongue, but she speaks English and she's American. And Arthur is obviously American, but he's learning some Korean so that he can respect her background and join her in some of her cultural history. But the fact that Hae-sun only speaks Korean, really makes him like the different one, the one who, like in Sesame Street, doesn't belong, right?
Right.
He belongs in Korea, and he's very much the fish out of water and the third wheel, even though his feelings for Nora are so strong and her feelings for him are strong. But, ultimately I think that language also shows that he just doesn't belong there. And she doesn't belong in Korea with her personality and her choices in her life and her husband, her American husband, right?
Yeah, she just wouldn't be happy there.
No, she needs a bigger world, a bigger life. And it's a happy story for her, because you really see that she made the right choice to stay in America, to marry an American, to live an American life. That's the right life for her. And you also see that, for Hae-sun, he has a different future, right? He has a different kind of a life, and he has to maybe come to terms with that and accept that. And, sometimes you talk about mature. Sometimes the mature choice is to accept the parts of life that are sad or disappointing, and that not all of our dreams come true, that not all of our wishes come true. And, in Hollywood, of course, they're big on wish fulfillment, but independent films are more about showing us these little mini life lessons, like, just because you want something doesn't mean you're going to get it. And how do you find a way to live with that anyway? And I think that was a beautiful psychological truth to share with the audience without, again, bashing us over the head with it.
Yeah, and there's absolutely a place for traditional comedies and romances and romantic comedies and, romantic tragedies. Certainly there's several of those, running alongside the bus as it pulls away, or fighting traffic to get to the airport before the flight takes off. That sort of tidy, bow tying end. But yeah, this movie just feels more lived in and just kind of more like, oh yeah, I can relate to that. And, you have to take pains as a filmmaker to differentiate these characters. If they're too similar, there's no movie. Is there that big of a difference if I choose one over the other? But for all those pains that are taken, I also saw a lot of similarities between them. They're both very thoughtful people. They live very rich sort of internal lives of the mind. Maybe Arthur's a little better at communicating that as a writer. He's a little more stereotypical Western male. At one point he's sitting there playing video games with earbuds in, and you're just like, oh, it's just like a frat guy or something. But it's like, everybody does that around the world. Maybe not everybody, but a lot of people. And a lot of the stuff that Hae-sun does, Arthur probably does too. Hang out with his buddies, go to bars, keep his head down sometimes, not be very social. But the director picks and chooses those juxtapositions so well that, again, she's not being reductive. She's not limiting. She's just saying, this is the part of this story I want to tell you. This is what I'm putting in the box. And there's room for a lot of other stuff too, on the fringes of it, on the complete outside of it.
Yeah. And it also shows that, Nora has a certain type of guy she likes. She likes a thoughtful, kind, sensitive guy. She likes a man who is a gentleman, right? So in the way that the two men are similar, you can see that Nora has that preference for a certain kind of man. And so it's not surprising that they have similarities, but then the things that are different about them, I think, are the things that are significant in terms of what Nora is looking for in her life and how she wants to expand outward. And Hae-sun is satisfied, at least, with, staying in his space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's not objective correct decisions. Just like there's not an objective moral judgment on these characters, this one is better than the other, or, more worthy of her love and attention. It's just, this is the choice they made. And like you said, sometimes the more sophisticated choice is to live with it and say, am I going to dig up this thing that's been growing here for a while and plant something new because that's what my soul tells me I need to do? Or am I going to find ways to continue nurturing this thing that's imperfect, but that's still alive?
Yeah. It's definitely one of those films that makes you think and makes you feel. And I think that's the best kind of cinema, right?
Yeah, I just, as is the case, as with a lot of critics who have films they champion, I just hope, more people see it. Because I think despite the, the Korean language element, which I loved, I think it's the strength of the film. I think it's very relatable, very broadly relatable. The immigration could stand in for cross states, or cross provinces. My family uprooted me because my parents got jobs somewhere else, or, they wanted a better life. Nora, in the beginning, her parents, they're artists. They're kind of up for rethinking things. They're up for interrogating things. And she sort of, that seed is planted there, and you can sort of see it in her as time goes on. Her work ethic, her self-consciousness and self-awareness, sort of always having a critical eye on things. You can tell she's kind of hard on herself sometimes, but it's not like she's only ever this type of person. We contain multitudes.
Yeah, it was I'm sure we could keep talking for a long time, but I'm going to wrap it up here. I wanted to ask you if you could share where people can find you if they're looking to see the kind of, work that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So most of my writing, as is most of what I do in my life, is on denverpost.com. And I have an author page on there that is not coming up as I'm Googling it here, but all you got to do is Google my name and Denver Post. So that's where most of my writing is collected. Oh, yeah, it's denverpost.com/author/John-Wenzel. My social media is just John Wenzel on X, formerly Twitter. And that's mostly my presence. I freelance and have in the past for, some other websites and magazines. If you look me up, an ad, Esquire, Rolling Stone, The Atlantic, Prime Timer, which is an excellent TV review website, Spin, stuff like that, you'll find me. But yeah, most of my day-to-day writing as a critic and arts reporter is on the Denver Post.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for talking today about this incredible movie, Past Lives. I think that we were very lucky to see it. And I agree. I hope that this podcast encourages more people to go out and see it, because it really was tremendous. And hopefully it will win some big awards because it's richly deserving.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. Obviously, my Chihuahua was extremely excited to be in the background. So yeah, this was a great discussion, and I really appreciate your insights.
This is Dr. Marcia Sirota. Thanks for listening to the Real Mental Podcast. Please leave a review and your comments wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to sign up for my free newsletter at marciasirotamd.com. While you're at it, why not check out my Ruthless Compassion podcast with over 140 episodes and counting? And if you have any ideas for guests for either Real Mental or Ruthless Compassion podcasts, please email us at info@marciasirotamd.com. Happy listening!